Hello and welcome back to the From My Prospective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. Now today, I'm going to be doing something that's a little different than my typical format. If you don't know what the typical format is, you've got to hit subscribe and be sure to hang out on the channel so you can learn a little bit more about that. But today, I'm actually going to be covering two topics because one is kind of similar to something else I've covered. The AP poll came out not too long ago, so we'll be taking a look at that. But the first thing I want to talk about today is the fact that LSU's realistically what would have been their backup quarterback going into this year has stepped down and has stepped away from football entirely. We're talking about Myles Brennan. He is no longer a part of the LSU football program. And there's a lot of interesting things around that I want to point out and kind of talk about a little bit. So we'll focus on the AP poll in the back half of this. If that's what you're looking for, just skip a little bit ahead and we'll get to talk about that. But for now, let's focus on Myles Brennan, because one of the big things that a lot of people have talked about right now is his NIL money. I've seen that on Twitter. The fact that he gets to keep all of that because you can't make those incentive based, which I actually really appreciate in theory. Obviously, you can't make incentive laden deals for collegiate athletes. That's basically you're putting them in the NFL at that point. But the fact that he's going to be able to keep all of this money. I remember Raising Cane's was one of his NIL deals. I don't remember, but he had a pretty extensive list of teams, or not teams, but companies that paid him NIL money. He's going to get to keep all that. Now, granted, tomorrow morning, every college athlete with an NIL deal is going to be waking up and have to agree to new terms of their contract, probably something along the lines of, if you retire from college football, this contract is null and void, or something along those lines. But as of right now, he's getting to make out like a bandit, and for a large reason of why he stepped down, it does not have anything to do with the NIL money, but it's at least a sweetener for the fact that he does have to step away from football, but at least he gets that little bit of money. The main reason that he decided to step down is it was reported that he was the first quarterback out of the QB competition right now going on at LSU. It looks like Jaden Daniels might be the favorite there. I know they've got another guy in the building that could potentially edge him out. He looked pretty good in the spring game. His name's escaping me right now, but he was informed that he is the last horse in the race. So what that really means to me is that Brian Kelly, whenever he tried to recruit, or not really recruit, but recruit in a sense, he pulled Brennan out of the transfer portal. He convinced him to stay at LSU and compete for the job. The fact that so much has changed between the point of Brian Kelly being hired and requesting the quarterback to come back and compete and try to be a part of this program to being the first horse out of the race, that says a lot about the situation at LSU even early into Brian Kelly's tenure. And I'm not saying necessarily that Kelly is to blame for Myles Brennan's retirement, or even necessarily that not being the starting quarterback or being, listed as out of that race this early into the contest is, but it's certainly an interesting turn of events from him bringing in Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier looking good. You've got those two guys that realistically probably should have been in the front of the race. I don't think Myles Brennan was ever going to be the starter, but to be announced out this early, you have to imagine he looked at that and thought, okay, that means I'm probably not getting a chance at all. That might make him third string. That might make him the backup's backup. And with a guy who has collegiate playing experience, to have been pulled out of the transfer portal, to have been convinced to stay, but then have to be the third string quarterback whenever he could have gone somewhere else and been the starting quarterback, is very weird. And it's a very just odd turn of what stuff I wouldn't have expected, honestly. I figured that Nussmeier would probably be the first, technically eliminated. He might be the secret QB2, but you at least put Myles Brennan in there for the experience and let him kind of help out, and then have Jaden Daniels start. Jaden Daniels, by the way, I'm pretty on record saying I don't think he's all that great of a coach. Not a coach, but a player. A quarterback last year at Arizona State, I think he looked really bad, but he's riding such a hot wave from his freshman season that I understand why you would want to start him, because there's a lot of untapped potential there and a lot of potential to get back to. But as far as LSU, just as a whole, with Myles Brennan leaving, again, I don't think it's necessarily Brian Kelly's fault, or it's a sign that, Baton Rouge is going to come crumbling down tomorrow. But if LSU underachieves wildly. Let's say that they get 5 wins, 6 wins by some horrendous stroke of luck. They can't figure it out. Their quarterback situation is murky. Brian Kelly just doesn't have a great grip on the team. I think Myles Brennan's departure is one of the earliest signs of that, and could really end up being either, wow, that was weird, now let's get back to focusing on LSU, or it could be, we should have known that this was not going to work out from the beginning, whenever Myles Brennan split just months after coming back to LSU on Brian Kelly's, ask and request. So it's going to be an interesting situation to follow. LSU is already one of the more interesting teams in college football, for me at least, certainly in the SEC, because they're one of those teams that you don't really know what they're going to be. But now, that just sweetens that pot even more now that Myles Brennan is gone. So that's kind of the main portion of things I wanted to focus on. It's still such a fresh situation right now. We're just barely past it. It got announced about 6 hours ago from when I'm recording this. I know it's coming out the day after, but there's still a lot that's left to know about the situation, so that's where I want to leave it for now. As far as the second half of this video, we are talking about the AP poll that just recently dropped, and my initial thought, I got to looking at it, and it's not too dissimilar from the coaches poll, which not necessarily a shock to me, but like most of the movement was like, okay, this team's going to get a 2-spot bump, or this team's going to get a 1-spot decrease. It wasn't like, oh, you guys had Texas A&M at 6, we have them at 23. It was all pretty consistent and across the board, which was interesting. So since I already have hit on the coaches poll quite a bit, I want to kind of walk you through what this list looks like. So Texas was probably the largest. It was definitely the largest movement. They are not in the AP poll. They were at 18 in the coaches poll and had a first place vote. BYU was included in the AP poll, so they kind of took that spot in a sense. They were just 25th, but they get the bump up in there. And the really fun part of this for me, and I really didn't hit on this too much, so it gives me a little bit of space to elaborate. I didn't talk about it too much in the coaches poll, is the others receiving vote section. I really got a kick out of looking at that. Tennessee was the first team out, and they were third out by a wide margin on the coaches poll, which I found interesting because Tennessee, I think, well, if you watch my my top 25 predictions for the end of the year, Tennessee was a top 10 football team for me. Obviously, that's predictive. That's not coming off of any real fact yet, but I really like Tennessee as a program. So them not being, at least them getting a little bit more respect in the AP poll was interesting to see how those two minds kind of differed. Texas was not too far behind from Tennessee, which is an important note. They were the next team out. They were fairly close to the Volunteers. They're not being slept on. It wasn't the AP poll being like, you know what, we're going to give them the one vote that Nebraska had, or, whatever. It was genuine, like, okay, we see that there's a lot of talent here, but we're not ready to commit to Texas being all the way in. Of course, USC was still high. That's another one of those teams. Miami was pretty high. Another one of those teams that's kind of getting a reboot in a sense and starting to build up prominence that they used to have, or at least on paper looks like they're building up prominence that they used to have. And the real fun focal point for me, and it actually kind of circles back to the first talking point, Auburn and LSU got less votes in the AP poll than they did the coaches poll, but they got significantly more than South Carolina and Mississippi State. Auburn and Mississippi State tied at 15, so you can't say significantly more there, but LSU had like 80-something odd votes, I believe. Whenever I was making my SEC portion of my predictions, because I went through on a like full schedule predictive app or website and went through and like went by conference. So like I kind of get a general idea of this is kind of what I think this conference is going to look like, yada yada, so on and so forth. Mississippi State and South Carolina were both better teams on that than I had LSU and Florida being, or not Florida, but Auburn. Auburn is in a bit of a state of disrepair, so putting them above Mississippi State, who have Will Rogers, that's at least consistency, and we know that a really good quarterback is really all Mike Leach needs to find some consistency and find some success. Really doesn't even need a great one. Gardner Minshew is limited talent-wise and limited in his tools, but it's not like he was struggling at Washington State. Mike Leach was putting together some good teams there. So to have that level of disparity between those, and it wasn't like I had Mississippi State and South Carolina all the way up there, but it was certainly enough to be like, I think that it's pretty clear that these two teams are better. Plus, when you look at a lot of these, and it's primarily analyst rankings, but you see your Will Rogerses and you see your Spencer Rattlers and those quarterbacks far above Jaden Daniels and Zach Calzada. Like, it's pretty clear in a way, and I think most people in these rankings, myself included, because I obviously fall victim to it because it's the most important position in sports, they lean a little heavy on quarterbacks. So to see the disparity between those two, while most people are in pretty clear agreement that Spencer Rattler and Will Rogers are better than what Auburn and LSU can put on the field, that it's strange to me at the very least. So there's not just a ton that I had issues with on this poll that I didn't with the coaches poll. They're all pretty similar. Still think Notre Dame and A&M are a little bit overranked. USC I'm not ready to go full bore on yet. Clemson I do have as a top 4 team. There's a lot of similar beats on the drum there, but there's at least a little bit of differentiation that gave me enough to point those out and talk about them for a little bit. So that is episode 27 of the From My Perspective podcast, kind of a multi-setup. Let me know if you prefer this style. So in, every once in a while I can go get 2 topics as opposed to spreading them out through the week and hitting it in this way, so that way, it lets us change up the topic and make it a little bit more diverse. Or if you prefer me just going all in on one specific topic, let me know that as well, and I can just continue to do that. But like I said, this has been episode 27 of the From My Perspective podcast, and as always, I'll see you next time.